Europe needs to be ready to face Russia without the United States. Now, I wish this wasn't the case, and I don't think it's the best course for American national security, but this is where we are today. And the former Lithuanian foreign minister put it well just yesterday when he paraphrased Winston Churchill, quote, "If necessary, we will have to survive alone, even if we receive no support from our transatlantic cousins." And this shouldn't come as a shock to anybody that's been following this war or the Trump campaign since before last election. I mean, if you look at how President Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance approached the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war, there were two main components anytime it came up. First is that this is a European problem. They need to, at the very least, take point, take lead, if not entirely take over the mission of deterring Russia and defending Ukrainian sovereignty or assisting Ukraine in defending their sovereignty. The second piece was, of course, around ending the war. And we heard President Trump throw out all sorts of different timelines, some of which are now being openly mocked by Russian media. We'll get to that here in a second. But ending the war quickly, either before he came into office, 24 hours after he was in office, 2 weeks after, 100 days, whatever that number might be. Clearly that has not played out, and we are starting to see increased frustration from President Trump around that. Just on Friday, he was asked about the status of these peace talks and what this looks like, and he says, hey, look, I thought this was going to be a lot easier than it was. Again, kind of reading between the lines, the more frustrating or unattainable peace appears for President Trump, the more likely it is that we continue, even escalate, our withdrawal from the European continent and our longstanding alliances there. Let's give President Trump a quick listen from his comments on Friday.
We have the one that I thought was going to be probably one of the easier ones, and that's with President Putin and Ukraine. And that turned out to be one that's a little bit more difficult, but the 7 are done. They were supposed to be much more difficult to solve. I solved every one of them, and we're going to get the other one done too. But it turned out to be a little bit more difficult than I thought.
So the whole end the war quickly, unfortunately, is not working out. I think that would have been good for a lot of people if there was some viable long-term peace deal that was struck 24 hours after President Trump came into office. That would have been a good thing. We're not there. Doesn't look like we're any closer right now. We also, looking at the other side of this, kind of putting more of the burden on Europe, we're seeing that play out in a statement yesterday that unfortunately was made by Vice President J.D. Vance out of nowhere. This was not in response to an interview. He was not put on the spot. He was volunteering up information to defend the recent U.S. military strikes against cartel members off the coast of Venezuela, and he veered off into Russia-Ukraine, where he said, quote, "Killing cartel members who poison our fellow citizens is the highest and best use of our military. The Democrats say, let's send your kids to die in Russia. Republicans say, actually, let's protect our people from the scum of the earth." It is disappointing, maybe to say the least, that we have any elected official, anybody with this much of a voice, putting out just blatantly incorrect information, knowingly incorrect, you have to assume, to skew public perception in a way that doesn't help us. It doesn't ever help us to have incorrect information when we're trying to decide on the best path forward. If you need to mislead people to achieve a policy, maybe the policy isn't good. I don't know. Just personal opinion there. But a couple key components here. The argument for supporting Ukraine, and I hope I've driven this home on the channel over the course of the last couple of years, is that it prevents us from needing to put American troops in harm's way at some point in the future. This is the argument of appeasement. If we appease Russia right now and let them steamroll their neighbors, it very well may open the door to a larger, deadlier conflict down the road that we cannot avoid. And we are forced to put, in some way, shape, or form, American sons and daughters on the battlefield. So this is deterring aggression early, so we don't have to deal with it more later. Suggesting that supporting Ukraine with intelligence or military equipment or financial means or training, whatever it might be, is the same argument as sending, the 1st Cav Division to roll across the Donbass into Russian territory. That is incredibly disingenuous. Those are very different conversations. There's no reason to muddy the waters by bringing those two together. They're not two conversations happening side by side. To that end, I haven't seen anybody of serious note mention, suggest, or advocate for American boots on the ground in Ukraine or Russia, as Vice President Vance here apparently thinks the fighting is happening on that side of the border. If that has been brought up, it's nobody with any power. It clearly has no support. There is no support in the United States for that. I've not argued that. I don't think that's a good move right now. Look, our military aid and our intelligence can carry that burden. It can do all of this stuff if we're up to the task. I would argue that we've been waffling from day one. we're waffling more and kind of walking away now, but we have never really committed to being a solid partner in providing a lot of necessary military aid and intelligence for Ukraine to deter Russia on their own with our NATO and the EU's backing. Now, also, this is not some Democrat or Republican issue. Again, unfortunately, like the vice president is trying to present this here, since the opening days of the Russian invasion, there has been bipartisan support, greater than 50% support when you ask the American people if they are in favor of sending military aid to Ukraine. Most of the time, they're in favor of sending more military aid to Ukraine. When you look into Congress, you'll see people on both the left and the right side of the aisle that continually vote to support Ukraine via the shipment of military arms. This is not the partisan issue that is being painted as, and unfortunately, I think this makes conversation even harder. Again, puts it in this category of this needs to and can only be Europe on their own, and somehow tries to present the case that we have nothing to do with this, never will have anything to do with this, and it will never impact us in the future. Personally, I think that is a poor assessment. Now, it's not just the conversations here in the United States. Russia, of course, is picking up on this as well. Millblogger 2 Major said, quote, Trump apparently named some new deadline, but his persona, overgrown with memes, no longer evokes anything but a smile. For a while now, Russia has been mocking the United States and President Trump around these deadlines. We keep putting down these deadlines and then keep extending the deadlines when we don't get what we want. It doesn't take a genius to read between the lines there and see that Russia is doing what they want, and we are the ones that keep backpedaling. Russian media has picked up on that. They are making fun of us. He says, and Washington itself intends to conduct its own special military operation in its own backyard. The Pentagon will definitely get understanding of the people if American Marines drag Venezuela or another state favored by Trump into their home port, since the annexation of Greenland didn't work, saying we're getting ready to start a military operation here. And we've talked about this recently. Tren de Aragua, the strike on the cartels off the coast of Venezuela. Russia says, hey, I think they're probably going to start a war there because that's going to be more favorable to the people, and they'll be even more distracted. I don't think that's probably too far off. Now, diving into this article from Gabrielis Landsbergis, the former Lithuanian Foreign Minister, but real quick, wanted to mention we just stood up a Patreon program for anybody who's interested in supporting our work here. We're rolling out patron-only videos, some Q&A, AMA type sessions. I think we're recording the first one here in the next day or two, so get your questions in if you got them. And then, of course, ad-free, sponsor-free videos. A link in the description below for anybody interested and able in supporting the channel. Now, the article here that just came out yesterday from Landsbergis wrote, quote, Europe's summer charm offensive has failed. Unfortunately, Europe didn't even wake up, let alone step up. And I think he raises some really good points here. So we're going to run through a bunch of this, and the full article will be linked in the description below. He said Europe based its summer security strategy on 3 pillars. 1, appeasing President Trump. 2, hoping that Putin will be satisfied with what he currently has. 3, praying that Ukrainians will not get tired. I feel like that's pretty accurate when you look at how everything is played out. Like, it kind of fits, right? And this is one of the arguments. I'm American, so I'm going to focus a lot of my energy on what the U.S. government is or isn't doing as it relates to national security issues. Europe, for their part, has done a lot of talk. It's been a lot of talk in a lot of good directions, but there has not been a lot of action following up from that talk. There's been little things, an increase in arms production. We've seen some additional shipments make their way to Ukraine, but by and large, the argument, the frustration, if you will, with Europe at this point is a lot more talk than action. And this is one of the things Landesberg hits on here. He says, when the United States announced the cancellation of the Baltic Security Initiative, many were shocked. I was more shocked at how much time we wasted praying that things would magically improve rather than heeding the warnings and making preparations for this inevitable scenario. So that Baltic initiative, real quick, popped up out of nowhere on Friday. And there's a lot to this. I'm going to try to cut through the noise real quick, but this is probably something we're going to have to come back to. The Associated Press put out an article saying confusion emerged Friday over Trump administration plans to halt some security assistance funding to European countries along the border with Russia, with some Baltic defense leaders saying they have not received any official notification. And they actually went through a list of our Baltic allies, whereas one after the other saying, we have no idea what this is. Like, what? And when did this happen? And others saying, we're reaching out trying to figure out what this actually means. So that's never good. A White House official who is not authorized to speak publicly said the action has been coordinated with European countries and is part of President Trump's plans to ensure Europe takes more responsibility for its own defense. Representative Bacon, a Republican, said, quote, "This administration continues to be weak towards Putin and a weak leader of the free world. This will read as an ugly chapter in U.S. history if the president does not reverse course." Senator Sheehan, the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said, quote, "This is a misguided move that sends exactly the wrong signal as we try to force Putin to the negotiating table and deter Russian aggression." Now, the reason I said it's kind of muddy and complex is there's a lot of aid that we provide to our Baltic allies. I can't tell exactly what this is yet. It seems like it might be a very small component, like $100 million on or about was one of the numbers mentioned by Estonia. So it's hard to tell at this point if this is a major figure, a small figure, something in between. So I'm going to take this with a grain of salt. Nonetheless, it's a signal. Even if it's $100, it is a signal that we are deprioritizing that program as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. Continuing on here with Landsbergis, he says, quote, "So what now? Now we have to prepare for a reduction of U.S. troops in Europe, likely in very significant numbers. And yes, it is possible that troops will be withdrawn from the Baltic region. What else should we be prepared for? Simply what has already been said. Ukraine will most likely be left without U.S. assistance. Russia will no longer be sanctioned because of changes in U.S. strategic calculations. Europe will have to face the Russian threat on its own." He said Ukraine has a plan and plans to fight. Europe's plan A, B, and C have not stopped the fighting. Putin simply has no need to stop and quite probably lacks the ability to reverse direction at this point. Therefore, Europe now has to develop a plan D for nothing less than Ukraine and Europe's survival. To paraphrase Churchill, if necessary, we will have to survive on our own, even if we receive no support from our transatlantic cousins. I think he's headed in the right direction, and it really hit home when I feel his frustration when he talks about, we've seen this coming for a long time. The best time to prepare for this was years ago. Unfortunately, we have to start preparing now and start making these moves for what the next few months and years might look like. I feel very similar here in the United States. I think we've done a lot of talk. Again, how many times have we heard from President Trump or senior officials in this administration that we're making progress on a peace deal, or Russian sanctions are around the corner, or give it another 2 weeks? It's a lot of talk. It's not a lot of actions. Russia is continuing with their actions. And I think this kind of shows the issue right now, the disconnect as this war rages on. They understand that this talk is not leading anywhere. They understand that this opens a window for them to press the advantage while they have it. Two majors said, quote, "The enemy is receiving and developing new types of weapons, including long-range ones, so the buffer zone, already forgotten in the media guidelines, will be effective if it stops somewhere at the border with Poland." As in, for a real buffer zone to exist in Russia's west, they need to have all of Ukraine. That's the only effective buffer zone, right up against Poland. And we're seeing this play out in terms of Russian strikes. Just last night, Russia launched their largest strike of the war. Now, you might get, I feel like we get desensitized hearing that, because I've said the term largest Russian strike of the war, I think 5 times in the last month, because that's what's happening, is they continue to increase the volume of specifically drones used in these strikes. Last night, 818 munitions, included 805 drones and 13 missiles. That is a massive bombardment. Now, Ukraine says they were able to intercept 747 of the 805 drones, as well as 4 of the 13 missiles. They recorded 9 missile hits and 56 strike UAV hits at 37 different locations, and then falling debris hit 8 different locations. President Zelensky issued a statement saying, quote, "Unfortunately, 4 people were killed in Ukraine and more than 44 injured. According to preliminary information, several drones crossed the border between Ukraine and Belarus," which is somewhat new. At the beginning of the war, we saw a lot of strikes. In fact, troops rolling across the border from Belarus into Ukraine. There was a point there where it largely stopped, and we saw the missile launches and the drones and the aircraft coming exclusively out of Russian territory. Kind of quietly, we've started to see that shift back in to where more and more there are attacks, specifically drone attacks at this point, coming out of Belarus, flying over Belarus. It doesn't appear that they're actually being launched from Belarusian territory. Zelensky said, "In Kyiv, there is destruction of ordinary residential buildings. In one of them, the floors between the 4th and 8th levels are broken. Overall, in the capital alone, there are dozens of injured. The cabinet of ministers meeting is damaged. A fire has started on the upper floors. More than 20 buildings and a kindergarten were damaged in Zaporizhia." There was a strike on a multi-story building in Odessa. Such killings now, when real diplomacy could have started long ago, are a deliberate crime and a prolongation of the war. It has been repeatedly stated in Washington that sanctions will follow refusal to talk. We must implement everything agreed upon in Paris. We also count on the implementation of all agreements to strengthen our air defense. Every additional system saves civilians from these vile strikes. The world can force the Kremlin criminals to stop killing. Only political will is needed. Thank you to everyone that helps. There's no indication that these Russian drone strikes are going to decrease at all. Again, since these peace talks have begun, we have seen a continuation of the largest strikes, followed by the next wave that is even larger. Russia understands that the United States is not making any progress in these peace talks. We seem unwilling to enforce additional sanctions or provide any sort of security guarantee for Ukraine, and Russia is taking advantage of that. Therefore, as mentioned in the article earlier in today's video, Europe needs to come up with the plan and recognize that whatever this next plan is, it is probably going to come without direct U.S. support, even loose U.S. support. That's the way this is headed, and the faster that we recognize that, I think that not just recognize, but plan for that, I think the better for everyone involved. In that case, better for Ukraine, better for Europe, and big picture, that could be better for the United States, because somebody has to stop this Russian aggression, or it's going to lead to a bigger war down the road. So stopping them now would be a benefit to the United States. But that's all we got for now. Again, for those interested in the Patreon program, that link will be in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.